That bass player looks like I feel sometimes after the end of long pieces of music where I just want to go, oh, and sit down. Such an amazing piece of music. Just the first movement there of that four movement symphony. You heard the one of the footmen said a Haydn would be over now, wouldn't it? And the truth is, an early Haydn symphony, all four movements would have been over by the time this first movement of the third symphony by Beethoven, the Eroica symphony, would have completed. And the music, as you can see, is stretched in almost every conceivable way. It's stretched in terms of accents, it's stretched in terms of dynamics, and of course, it's stretched in terms of form. The piece is getting longer and longer and longer. And despite the fact that it has only two short bursts for an introduction, the you remember in a sonata form there's three, and here now four parts of a sonata form. There's the exposition, the development, the recapitulation, and in this case a long coda. Coda being the Italian word for tail. And the dramatic, well, it's all dramatic, but part where Herr Beethoven sort of lost it was that scene between the end of the development and the recapitulation. This is an important moment. We talked about it last week with the Mozart piano concerti, where there's a cadenza, there's a moment where the music is lifted up at this big half cadence. And this is true here as well. At the end of the development, there's this big half cadence on B flat major, up, up, up. And Beethoven writes into the music that the horn is supposed to come in the home key. So there's this tension between the dominant key, the B flat major sonority, and the home key, the E flat major, and they crash against each other. And Beethoven's student Ries heard this clash and figured that the horn had come in early. Now, how would that happen? First of all, this music had never been heard by any of these performers at the time. It didn't sound this good. I'm sure that it didn't sound this good on a first reading of the Eroica. It's lovely to listen to, though, and it's more dramatic to think that the orchestra increases in time. But the part that the hornist would have had, all the parts that all these instrumentalists would have had, is just their own part. So the only way to figure out how it all flows together is by counting very, very well. But in the first case, because this music was copied out, Beethoven would have written it into score, and then a bunch of people would have copied it out. They would have taken the score and a first violin part, say, and they would have looked at the first violin part and they would have written out just the first violin part. Now, these parts were copied through the previous night and handed out. What you didn't see in the movie is they handed them out to the instrumentalists right as they arrived. Some of these pieces that Beethoven would write, the parts were still wet. The ink hadn't dried yet. That's how new they were. And in this case, they assumed that the copyist had made a mistake counting too few measures and that the horn was supposed to come in two measures later. But no, in fact, he was correct. Beethoven, again, is playing with your understanding of the music, and that at the end, after all of that tension at the end of the development, he brings one big piece of tension where the horn actually seems to come in on the wrong key, but really he's anticipating the music that is to come, being a leader, a bold new person moving into a new world. And that's what the symphony is all about. It's a completely new model for a symphony. It's a new world. Everything is stretched. And you might remember at the end of our class last week where Haydn says it's completely new, the artist as the hero, the artist as the center of the piece. And Haydn says, I expect that's why it's so noisy. I would have loved to be here for the first performance of this work ever since it's been in the repertoire, and it paved the way for Beethoven's symphonies to come. I want to turn now to a piece of music by Beethoven that most of you will know. And this is an aspect of the idea of the hall where it happened, where I wish I could go back and hear a piece of music for the first time without the layers of history, both my own personal history, but also more broadly, the layers of history being placed upon it. Now, this is what is called now the Moonlight Sonata. It's Beethoven's Sonata number 14 in C sharp minor, and it opens. Beethoven did not call it the Moonlight Sonata. Beethoven called it Sonata quasi un fantasia, sonata like a fantasy. It opens with a slow movement, which is very unusual for Beethoven, very unusual for piano sonata in general. The title Moonlight came about after Beethoven had died, but it fired something in the imagination of people. But see if you can rid yourself of that idea and listen to it anew with fresh ears and see what you think of the music. I'll tell you what I thought of it after I listened to it the other day with trying to listen to it with fresh ears. But too, try to see if you can just strip yourself of all those, piano lessons with a mean piano teacher or a great piano teacher back in the day, if you played this piece, and find a way of hearing it afresh.